I'm Nicole Huck, this is Blue Sky, and today I'm asking, how important do you think research farms are, especially the ones here in Saskatchewan at Scott and Indian Head? They'll both be closed by the end of the year. So today on the show, we're going to speak with Ron DePaw. He's a retired Canadian wheat breeder. Did you know that more than half of the wheat grown in Canada can trace its roots back to the 65 varieties he developed right here? We'll also hear from a farmer and an economist who can put a dollar figure on the economic impact of research farms, and we'd like to hear from you. What do you think of the farm closures? How have they served you? And what impact have they had on your operation? We're going to open those phone lines at 12:30, and the number is 1-800-716-2221, or you can email bluesky@cbc.ca. Richard Gray knows the Indian Head Research Station well. The U of S professor of agriculture and resource economics grew up in that part of the province, and he still helps his family farm the land. But in recent years, he's been assessing the economic impact of research farms. I spoke to him earlier and asked about his reaction to the closing of the Scott and Indian Head research farms.
I think it's potentially a significant loss for the province and the nation. I believe that agricultural research contributes a great deal to economic growth, and there's a lot of I've done a lot of analysis that shows that over time. And closing the station, particularly the disruptions by not having a plan for what to do next, I think raises a lot of threats to how that knowledge that's already being created is going to get put into place, and also maybe reduce the flow of knowledge going forward and making research more difficult to do in Saskatchewan.
Did you see this coming?
Not this specific year or this specific date, but I know Agriculture Canada has said in the past they want to get out of breeding. I don't know whether this is they haven't said that this time. They've just said that they want to reduce costs, and so I didn't really see the site closures as something that would happen, especially without consultations.
So why do you think that the federal government is doing that now?
When governments decide that they're going to reduce expenditures, it's not an easy process, so they delegate in this case it was a 15% cut that was sort of the government wanted across departments, and when it landed on in agriculture, the cuts they made were to close these stations and other things. Within the Canadian agricultural policy framework, and also within the budgets of Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, they fund a lot of the business risk management programs. They typically 60% share in a lot of those costs. As a result, these programs, which were developed in the early 1990s, consume a lot of the Agriculture Canada's budget, and as a result, when the requirements for those programs go up over time, and you have to cut something, what you can cut immediately is something that's fully in control of Agriculture Canada. So they decided that they would lay off people, etc., within their organization, and whereas a lot of these BRMs, etc., basically were unscathed because they were part of a federal-provincial agreement.
Can you help people who aren't in the field understand a little bit more about BRMs and maybe just how that's changing in recent years?
Okay, so for example, there's crop insurance. Crop insurance is farmers pay a portion of the premium, about 40%. The federal government pays about 40%, and the provincial government pays 20%. And there's also administration costs are also picked up by the federal government. So there's significant government support in those programs. If, for example, you have a number of years of consecutive drought, the costs of those programs go up, and they also grow over time as the prices are higher, the industry has a larger footprint, or productivity goes up. So all of those budgetary costs have increased over time, and that some of those costs come directly out of the Agriculture Canada's budget. As a result, when they're asked to cut, programs, those are difficult to cut in the short run, so they have to cut things that were more in their control.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. We've seen a lot of drought and poor crops in recent years, potentially related to climate change. And if you can't change those costs, I guess they're looking to make up the difference somewhere.
That's right, but it's a very short run type of analysis. If you look at what's going to benefit producers in the long run, it's having better varieties, having more drought-resistant varieties, for example. It's going to be, and if you cut the research expenditures, you're not going to have that stream of new varieties and the better agronomic tools going forward, and that's going to have significant impacts on producers in the long run. So if you look at, for example, if you were going to take a farm today and give them 1970 type technology, they would say, well, you can't make money at that. You need the newer varieties, you need the newer technologies, the new agronomics, the newer pesticides, etc. So the industry has grown over time, and farms have become more profitable over time, which has gone into land prices in large part because their productivity has improved. And the productivity improvement can be directly associated with the investments in research. So if we cut research right now, that may not have an immediate effect on productivity next year, but 5, 10, 20, 30 years down the road, it has very large impacts and will reduce productivity growth in the agricultural sector, which has been pretty good in the past. But limiting that is a very short-run decision, which will have long-run consequences.
And I understand you have some numbers associated with that, the cost-benefit ratio, let's say, for every dollar spent on research, how much money that generates.
Yeah, there's been a lot of study of the rate of return or the benefit-cost ratio on agricultural research expenditures. Internationally, there's been literally hundreds of studies, and the median benefit-cost ratio is about ranged in 20 to 1 to about 40 to 1. But in getting closer to home, looking at, say, wheat breeding or other crop breeding, the most recent study we did had a 35 to 1 benefit-cost ratio.
Can you give us an example of where declining research has hurt farmers? Maybe it's even in other parts of the world that we can look at.
Well, I think one place that I've spent a fair bit of time looking at other agricultural systems in Northern Europe, France, Germany, and the UK made a decision to privatize plant breeding there, crop breeding. And if you look at wheat specifically, they made those decisions about 40 years ago. While the breeding companies are active putting out varieties, they've been very unsuccessful in creating varieties that have durable disease resistance. And as a result, yields in France, Germany, and the UK, average those over since between 95 and 2025, that's a 30-year period, there's only been a 3% yield increase. And at the same time, in Western Canada, we've seen an 80% yield increase. So wow. There are examples where getting out of, for example, public breeding could have long-term consequences. So I think Europe is an example of a path not to go down, whereas I think there's probably a thought that that's still a good idea to privatize breeding.
Besides developing new grain varieties, what have the research farms given farmers? I'm thinking even in technology.
Indian Head also played a very pivotal role in the development of zero tillage. Guy Lafond was an agricultural scientist there, worked with Jim Halford, who created the ConservaPack seeding system where they found the optimal seed placement, etc. And then working through with Ag Canada, they created this Indian Head Ag Research Foundation that's located on the farm to do large field level trials, and they were able to demonstrate the benefits of that technology. And from there, they also helped create the Saskatchewan Soil Conservation Association at that time. and between the technology and the organizations and the agronomy that went along with that, it really led zero tillage innovation, and Saskatchewan became a leader in the world in that regard. And even Australians can trace their zero tillage back to Halford and Lafond, etc. So it makes a big difference, and that has had tremendous returns for producers here. Output has increased a great deal. Soils have improved. And I don't think anybody would want to go back to the systems that we had in the 1970s.
So to what extent do you think that federal officials actually understand the implications of these cuts?
I don't know how much, because there wasn't a lot of prior consultation, I'm not sure they understood particularly the short run implications. That's obvious. And the longer run implications, I don't think they fully appreciate either, in the sense that if you don't have a number of sites where a number of, I'm going to say, ecosystems or agroecological stations where you have different climates, for example, Indian Head is representative of a large part of Saskatchewan's grain production. If you take the testing away from that site, then you're not, for example, testing agronomics, and you're not testing varieties for that representative area of the province. And that has long-run implications for how productive breeders can be.
So it's unlikely that Ottawa is going to reverse this decision. So what do you recommend farmers do to make sure that this research isn't lost?
Well, I mean, I think there has to be, and I think there's a lot of discussions right now to, first of all, minimize the disruption and make sure there is a plan in place before things are, if you like, taken apart. For example, if you sold off a piece of equipment or moved a piece of equipment from a breeding program or an agronomy program, that might prevent it from seeding occurring, for example. So it's really important to keep the personnel and the machinery in place until there's a new, if you're going to move it, there's a new location that's fully developed. And secondly, even if Ag Canada no longer wishes to have a presence at Indian Head, there's still very much a need to create and maintain that site for future breeding activities, whether they happen in Ag Canada or outside of Ag Canada, or through a private company operating on that land or a nonprofit operating on that land. So maintaining this, there's two issues. One is maintaining the site long term, and the other is the shorter run issue of making sure that there isn't too much disruption. And I mean, I could give you a good example of disruption. There's a breeder seed increase unit, which basically takes breeder seeds and multiplies larger quantities of it, so then the seed companies can then grow those varieties and sell them to producers. If you lose a year of production in that breeder seed, those varieties have had 10 years in the making aren't going to be able to go to the market or an additional year. So it disrupts that whole supply chain and very large impacts when that happens. So you got to fix those, make sure it isn't disrupted in the short run. And two, you have to make sure you work with stakeholders to keep the physical assets in the land. The land was chosen in 140 years ago because it was ideally suited for research, and it represented it was representative of a large amount of grain production in Western Canada. That's still true today. So maintaining that as a infrastructure for research is also really important.
Richard Gray, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
That's Richard Gray. He's a professor of agricultural and resource economics at the University of Saskatchewan. I'm Nicole Huck, and you're listening to Blue Sky on CBC Radio 1. Two agricultural research farms in this province just had their federal funding cut, and they're expected to close by the end of the year. So today we're learning about what happens at these farms and what's at stake for farmers in this province and the economic impact of this decision. We want to hear from you. What do you think of the closure of these research farms? Have they served you? What impact have they had on your operation? You can call 1-800-716-2221 or you can email bluesky@cbc.ca. Now, if there's one man who knows what research farms can do, it's Ron DePaul. He worked at the Swift Current Research Station for 41 years. And during that time, he developed 65 new wheat varieties. More than half of the wheat grown in Canada can trace their origins to those varieties. So Ron, what a treat. Welcome to Blue Sky.
Hey, thank you, Nicole. And it wasn't just me, it was the whole team. There's a whole team of people involved in the development of wheat varieties. So you've got to have a lot of hands in the pans and boots in the field and people to be able to test them around the province, like at Indian Head and Scott and other locations.
So team effort, I'm hearing here. Thanks for that. And James Wojla farms near Indian Head. He's also the reeve of the RM of Indian Head. James, welcome to Blue Sky.
Thank you.
Now, Ron, the Swift Current Research Station isn't on the chopping block. In fact, it's staying open, which means seed breeding will continue. So what has you concerned about the closure of the Indian Head Research Farm?
Well, it's not really appreciated that the wheat program at Swift Current is really the arid prairie wheat program. It's headquartered in Swift Current, but it had testing facilities at Regina and Indian Head. And that being able to, and if you think about that, people in Saskatchewan will know you have a very different climate, very arid climate in Swift Current, and it gets progressively warmer. Well, not necessarily warmer. It gets moister as you go to the east. And so you get onto the Regina Plains and you've got very productive conditions, but it's still got high levels of evapotranspiration. Then you get the Indian Head and you get another transition. So be able to develop varieties that have broad adaptation, you test under the challenging conditions of Swift Current, and you get over to Indian Head and you've got very productive conditions, very, very different range and average yields. So you're able then to develop varieties with broad adaptation. And on the flip side, for agronomy trialing, the best agronomic practices in Swift Current will be very different than the clay soils of Indian Head. So you've got to have specificity for your agronomic practices, but when it comes for developing a variety, that adaptation, you don't know what the weather's going to be from one year to the next. So you want to have some built into the varieties that have got a lot of flexibility. And by being able to test at Swift Current and then way over there at Indian Head, it makes a huge difference in being able to select those unique gene combinations.
Yeah, I had no idea that there were more, but at least 65 wheat variations. So what role did the Indian Head Research Farm play in the development of these wheat varieties that you and your team came up with?
Well, we would start testing in the early generations for their agronomic performance. And the program, the Arid Prairie Wheat Program, headquartered in Swift Current, was unique not only in Canada, but many, many other places around the world for testing in early generations at diverse locations. So from the very beginning, when we had enough seed, we'd started testing at Swift Current, but then at other places like Indian Head, Regina, Lethbridge, Morden, across the prairies. And that allowed us to be able to find these unique combinations.
Now, I know that we have folks already on the line hoping to get in here, but before we bring them in, I want to come to you, James, because I would like to know from you. I mean, you're hearing how great the conditions are near Indian Head. Maybe you can tell us if that's true or not. But what difference has Indian Head operation made for you and your farm?
Well, like Dr. Richard Gray was speaking about the advancements in soil conservation, direct seeding. And this is all comes from research done here at the farm here on the ground soil similar to what we have on our farms around this area that are similar to across the province in variation. The seed development that's done here, and there's even been things from straw management for retaining moisture in our soil, which helps us between the seed development, making new seeds that work better with from tolerance to insects, disease, and things like sawfly and that we used to be fighting with, but now we have these new varieties that we don't have to be out there swathing and dealing with. How we manage our straw, which gives us the coverage for the next year's crop going into to hold that soil moisture, into the direct seeding that we do now. You go back in the 80s, we were 50-50 farming. We were summer following. Dirt was blowing away, soil was blowing away. And we had shelter belts not to try to hold it, but now we don't have those problems. So these are all advancements that came from having a research farm and having it for us right here too.
I understand that last year you got a lot less moisture than you normally do.
Yeah, last year on our farm, we averaged about 3.5 inches of rain. We're usually closer to 10. We still managed to pull off above average yields. That's all attributed to this. The things that we've learned from this and the direct seeding, the different varieties of wheat and that we have that are able to sustain through that.
Today we're talking about Ottawa's decision to close the research farms at Scott and Indian Head, and we'd like to hear from you. What do you think of these closures? How have they impacted your operation? You can call right now. That's 1-800-716-2221, or you can email bluesky@cbc.ca. I want to head to the phone lines where we've got David on a farm north of Regina. David, welcome to the program.
Oh, thanks for taking my call.
What did you want to add to the conversation?
Okay, I'm the former officer in charge and head of the seed increase unit at the Indian Head Research Farm, so I know the operation quite well, and I appreciate the comments made by the panelists. And I don't really have that much to add there, but there's another element to research at Indian Head which is unique, and that is agro-environmental program there, and that's looking at issues such as greenhouse gas generation, carbon sequestration, pollinator populations, and things like that. And there's a direct economic element is researching for getting economic returns on marginal lands, not the Class 1 lands at Indian Head, but say typically on First Nation reserves is often there on marginal land. And the scientist operating this program is working in cooperation with First Nations to look at ways of getting economic returns on their land, which is quite often marginal productivity for agriculture. So I think that's an issue that I think is being lost in the whole conversation, and I think it's something that should be brought to the public and to people's attention, that this would be a loss. And that's my comment on that. I mean, the other thing that we've talked about, varietal development and agronomics, and that I fully agree with the speakers when they speak about that. So that's something I don't know if the panelists would like to comment on that, but that's something that I'd like to bring to people's attention.
David, thank you so much. I didn't realize there seems to be such a big swath of different kind of research that's happening at the farm. Ron or James, do you have thoughts on what we just heard from David?
Yeah, I agree very much with David. Like the network of activities, research activities that go on, say, for example, at Indian Head, is very diverse. Like, it's a site, but researchers from many different places are using what can be done at Indian Head for their research. And that, David just gave a very good example. From the University of Saskatchewan, it's an AFC employee. It's Reynold Lemke, and he's using the rotations, for example, at Indian Head to look at what happens with soil carbon in these diverse rotations. And there's all kinds of examples of researchers from other places that are using the land, the experiments, the rotations, all of the stuff that goes on in a connected way. Another thing about the Indian Head research farm is they have a seed increase unit. And people aren't aware that there's 30 different crop kinds that are growing there. And there might be 300 varieties over the course of time that are grown there. And it's somewhere about 20 to 25% of all of the seed that is pedigreed by CSGA, the Canadian Seed Growers Association, traced back to the seed that is produced and developed at the Indian Head Seed Increase Unit. In terms of an impact, it's like this. You have a little at the base of my hand. You have a little something that comes on out, but it has this massive impact on Canadian agriculture.
Now, we have another caller on the line. Kelvin is on the line from McCord. Kelvin, what do you want to add to the conversation?
I guess thank you for taking my call. I guess what I would add, it's such a multiple scope is what Indian Head Scott is doing, whether it's the beef or the cattle sector, or the grain sector, is independent third-party research. So when any of these new practices that are coming forward, they're being tested at these research stations, and like Saskatchewan Crop Insurance, other different government programs are looking to them to say that they were actually very beneficial, whether it's cover cropping or intercropping, climatic adaptive conditions, whether it was zero till, all that stuff. It will be very detrimental to my operation when we lose this stuff.
Kelvin, thanks for calling in.
And I guess what you also have to say, it's not just Indian Head. We're losing the organic research in Swift Current, so that's for Western Canada. We're losing all that.
Tell me more about that.
I don't. Steps along.
Yeah, tell me more about that one.
So Miriam Fernandez is in Swift Current at the Spark Research Station, and her Department for Organic Research in Farming has been cut.
Okay. How do you know all this, Kelvin?
I guess I'm involved in a lot of this stuff. Lacombe Research Station, I'm a Saskatchewan Stock Grower Director at Large. Losing the Lacombe Research Station, we lose all ability to change our grading system because we have to have it done third party, and it's our only facility in Canada that does grading on beef and have on-site slaughter facilities. So losing all of these 7 operations along the way, whether it's facilities or satellite facilities or even some of these programs, that is where I see the detrimental part going forward in my operation.
Well, I really appreciate you joining the conversation today, Kelvin. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was Kelvin on the line from McCord. And if you'd like to join the conversation, there's still time. You can call 1-800-716-2221, or you can email bluesky@cbc.ca. Helping city folks understand what the heck is happening in this province and why this research is so important for the economy and for all the food that we eat here. So I really appreciate the thoughtfulness of our guests today. I want to read an email that came to us from Clayton, and he writes, I'm a farmer growing wheat, canola, and other crops. These research cuts will reduce Canada's exportable food surpluses, reduce farmer incomes while pushing Canada backwards in new wheat variety development substantially. Federal income tax on profits made by everyone in the grain supply chain will be reduced due to stagnation in new wheat variety development. To say these cuts are short-sighted is an understatement. The federal Minister of Agriculture and or their advisors should resign or be fired for coming up with such a poorly thought-out idea. And that came to us from Clayton. James, you're a farmer and you farm near Indian Head. You were listening along to those callers. What were you thinking?
Well, as the one said with the ag sector too, it's, a huge impact on them on the forage research and everything that's been done, and with shutting that down and closing that through the ag or the livestock sector is going to be damaged hugely from that, and the same as us on the grain side with the seed development, seed research, and to stop the research and growth of that now, it's basically saying we're happy with where we're at and we're going to stay there for the rest of our life. Because once we start cutting the research, there's going to be very little advancement. We're just cutting out that step for advancement right away, taking that out from under us.
James, how long have you been farming?
It's been about 20 years now.
And what kind of technological advances have you seen over that time?
That would be, there's been so many that I say even the switching to the zero till, but from our seed placement, the importance of seed placement, the benefits of even our fertilizer applications, from the depth, the amounts of fertilizer that we use, and the research that's been done on that. Before it was kind of you just kept throwing fertilizer at it and hoping for a better yield with the rain. Now we have the research that's been done across Canada through Ag Canada and other research facilities, though, that we can somewhat pinpoint where we want to fertilize for, what nutrients we need to put with these different crops for the yields we want to get.
So you don't have to do the trial and error the same way you had to in the past.
The trial and error is done, and we would still be so far behind now as to where we are now.
Mm-hmm. I want to bring in another caller. We have Jim on the line, who's a farmer from Delisle. Jim, welcome to Blue Sky. What's on your mind?
Hi. I'm an organic farmer, and organic farming in Canada is, it's still a relatively small part of agriculture, only 3 or 4% of the land base, but it's a $10 billion retail industry in Canada, and a lot of that is imported food. So there's lots of room for increases in organic production, and we badly need research. I mean, one of the problems we have in organics is that we're everything. We're chickens, pigs, cows, field crops, horticulture crops. So, we get research money, but we get research money that has to be spread over all of these different kinds of enterprises. And the only field crop research station on organic and regenerative low input agriculture in Western Canada is Miriam Fernandez's program in Swift Current, and losing it is just a serious blow.
How closely did you work with that program?
I go to field days there every year. I read the research that comes out of the station. There's the opinion that organic agriculture is minimalist agriculture. I mean, we're avoiding certain kinds of things, but that doesn't in any way imply we don't need a lot of scientific research to improve our yields, to improve the quality of the products that we grow. We need research, big time, and we're not blessed with a lot of it.
Jim, do you have an example of some research that came out of that program in Swift Current that you were able to incorporate into your own operation?
Sure. They do. They're doing lots of current research on companion cropping, several crops at one time, and we do that. We do peas and flax this last year, which proved to be quite successful. Yeah. But a wide variety of things. Miriam does research on forage crops too, which are really important to us. I mean, one of the only ways that we have to suppress perennial weeds like quackgrass and Canada thistle is through forages that we rotate around our farm, and those forages also improve the soil quality at the same time. And that kind of research she works on. She and other researchers at the station, and university researchers that use the plots at Swift Current. So yeah, it's really an important program.
Yeah.
In Canadian agriculture, organic agriculture, there's a science cluster for organics. and it's $12 million over 5 years. But pork has a $12 million research cluster, and dairy has, I think, a bigger one than that. So, again, organics, that's spread over every kind of agriculture. Pork is only on pork.
Well, Jim,
we need more research.
I really appreciate you calling in today because, you know what, I didn't know this. So, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners didn't either. So I really appreciate it. Thank you.
You're most welcome.
That was Jim in Delisle. There's still time to join that conversation, 1-800-716-2221. Got another email here from Milton. He's the president of the Agricultural Union. It says, the cuts to agriculture and Agri-Food Canada came with the rationale that the federal government in the last 10 years has grown by approximately 30% of employees. So Mark Carney asked all departments to cut 15% of employees. Agriculture Canada, in the same time frame, has dropped by 15% of employees. Yet, it was still asked to cut 15% more employees. That's where departments are not only asked to make this cut, yet they were forced to cut without thinking about food security and research for future developments. That came to us from Milton. Ron, I want to talk about something that Richard Gray referenced earlier, and he was talking about the lack of research in Northern Europe. So decisions made 30 years ago and what that looks like, what the impacts are now. I mean, we're at a pivotal time right now where these decisions are going to impact not just next year, but decades down the line. What do you think that these cuts, what impact will this have going forward?
Well, you're asking me to be predictive.
There we go. You're going to put on your
okay. I'll share some experience. I've been involved in research, collaborating with people from around the world, and very much aware of what has happened in Europe is a disconnect between research, basic research, and then the varieties that get developed. You'll go to a conference about something very topical. I'll give you an example. I was invited to give a presentation in Spain this past October, and it was all about adapting to heat and drought. There wasn't a single breeder from Europe there. But lots of academics. And that's a fear as AFC moves upstream, they'll be disconnected from the real world.
Yeah.
And so I think what this is implying, Nicole, is we need a new way of doing the things that we need to do that'll have an impact for food production, for agriculture in Canada. We need a new way of doing things. And that's where I think we've got to draw on the willingness of all of the people that are impacted in agriculture to figure out a new way. We've got to have a new way. And the Carney government, one of the pillars is economic growth. Economic growth. And agriculture, as Richard Gray has pointed out, one of his analysis, it was something like a 31% internal rate of return on the wheat checkoff, which means every 2 years, your money in the bank has doubled.
Ron, this is very interesting, but we're running up to the end of the clock here. And I'm just so curious about potential solutions here. This is what they're supposed to close by the end of the year. We know that if they close, we've heard the entire show about the impacts. So what can people do here? Like James, I understand that when farmers have to pay a fee when they sell their grain, producer checkoffs, that goes into a fund for each commodity group. As a farmer, would you be willing to pay more if it meant that the research can continue at Indian Head? Like who's going to step up here and be able to do this research? I'll let you go first.
I feel a lot of the seed companies and that may be willing to step up. It's a cost that we will incur on the farmer's end in the end for buying our new seeds and seed development, but I feel there might be an opportunity for things to go that way, or for like, we already have the IHARF, the Indian Head Agricultural Research Foundation, which is a nonprofit which farms the lands around where the plots at Ag Canada are. They work in conjunction with Ag Canada. And something like that, kind of a foundation or something to set up. But it is good to hear when the announcement was first made and heard around Indian Head, it was talked about that they were shutting down in May, which stopped all research right there for this year and left all those fields unattended. So now that they've extended it to December, that there might be some time possibly to set up something for it to carry on. In the end, it's like all agriculture, the producer in the end is the one that will pay for it, but where that money is going to come from will be, I guess, interesting to see in the end, but it's something I don't think anyone I've talked to wants to see it end.
Yeah, and Ron, the last word I'll give to you. Is there an opportunity for some kind of Hail Mary pass right now?
Well, I would say don't count on the government. We need a new way.
We're making bumper stickers that say that, right, Ron?
We need a new way. We've got to figure out something new. And all of the players in agriculture, all of these organizations, we've got to come together to figure out a new way. And there's lots of opportunity for economic growth in the ag sector. Speak to the farmers. They've proven it over and over and over again. And the rate of return on the investment, like the taxpayers and the farmers each are getting about a 32-to-1 return on investment on the wheat checkoff.
There's so many more people who wanted to join this conversation today. I think we're going to have a big mailbag for our show next week. So for folks like Gary and Broadview, I'm sorry that we ran out of time here, but our talkback number is 1-800-661-7540. Today I was speaking with Ron DePaw, a seed breeder at the Swift Current Research Station for 41 years, and James Wojula, farms near Indian Head, also the reeve of the arm of Indian Head. Thank you so much, gentlemen.
Thank you.